The rain wasn't the only cold thing on the streets of Oak Ridge that Tuesday night. In Patrol Car 7, a decision was brewing that was far colder. Officer Frank Kincaid, a man whose patience had worn as thin as the tires on his cruiser, saw a pair of taillights ahead. They belonged to a 20-year-old sedan, a car that had seen better decades being driven perfectly within the speed limit. But in Kincaid's eyes it was out of place, and behind the wheel was a silhouette that fit a narrative he'd already written in his mind. He flicked on the sirens, a predatory sound in the quiet suburb. For the man driving that car, the next 9 minutes would feel like a lifetime. For Officer Kincaid and his rookie partner, those same 9 minutes would be a countdown to the complete and utter destruction of theirs. Marcus Thorne loved the purr of his 1999 sedan. It was a low, guttural rumble, the sound of reliability of history. The car had been his father's, a rolling monument to a man who believed in maintenance over flash in substance over style. Most of his colleagues at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., drove sleek, modern vehicles befitting their status. They'd often rib him about his relic, but Marcus didn't care. This car, with its faint scent of old leather and his father's pipe tobacco, was his sanctuary. It was the vessel that carried him from the marble halls of federal power back to the simple reality of being a son, a husband, and a father. Tonight's drive was longer than usual. He was coming from a 3-day intensive seminar in Philadelphia on updated civil rights legislation, and instead of flying, he'd chosen to drive. He needed the time to decompress, to let the legalese and harrowing case studies fade into the background, replaced by the smooth jazz on the radio and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. He was on the last leg, cutting through the quiet, affluent suburbs of Oak Ridge, Delaware. It was a town known for its pristine lawns, its top-tier school district, and its almost complete lack of violent crime. It was also, as Marcus knew from DOJ demographic data, overwhelmingly white. He passed a sign that read, "Welcome to Oak Ridge, a community of excellence." He smiled wryly. Excellence was a subjective term. In his line of work, he saw communities that boasted of excellence while hiding deep-seated rot. He wasn't thinking of that now, though. He was thinking of his wife, Sarah, who had probably just put their 2 young daughters to bed. He was thinking of the glass of bourbon he'd pour himself, the weight of the crystal in his hand, as he finally sat down in his favorite armchair. He was just a man, driving home. In Patrol Car 7 of the Oak Ridge Police Department, the mood was starkly different. Officer Frank Kincaid, 52 and barrel-chested, gripped the steering wheel with a familiar, simmering anger. The world, as Kincaid saw it, was constantly testing him, chipping away at the authority and respect he felt he was owed. Every punk kid who sneered, every defense attorney who twisted his words, every new departmental policy that felt like a slap on the wrist, it all fed a beast of resentment inside him. He'd been on the force for 25 years, and he felt the streets were more dangerous, the people more disrespectful than ever before. Next to him, Officer David Miller, barely 24, was trying to make himself smaller. Riding with Kincaid was a masterclass in tension. The older officer was a legend in the department for 2 reasons: his high number of arrests and his equally high number of citizen complaints. Command saw him as a necessary evil, a real street cop who got results even if his methods were abrasive. Miller, fresh out of the academy, was still trying to find his footing. He wanted to be a good cop to help people the way he'd imagined as a kid. But the reality of the job was proving to be a murky grey, and Frank Kincaid was the deepest shade of it. "Look at this," Kincaid grunted, his voice a low growl. He gestured with his chin at the sedan ahead of them. Marcus Thorne's car. Miller squinted. What about it? He's doing the limit. Tail lights are working. It's not the car, kid. It's the context. Look where we are. Hemlock Lane, million-dollar houses, manicured hedges. And you've got a beater from the last century rolling through at 11 o'clock at night. Doesn't fit. Miller knew what Kincaid was getting at. It was the unwritten rule, the thing they never taught at the academy, but that guys like Kincaid lived by profiling. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. Could be a contractor, Frank, or a caregiver leaving a late shift. Kincaid scoffed a short, sharp sound of derision. A caregiver in that piece of junk? Doubtful. More likely he's casing joints, or maybe he's got something in the car he shouldn't. Drugs, weapons. You get a feeling for these things, kid. A predator's instinct. He watched the car for another moment. And I'll bet you a month's pay I know what the driver looks like. The implication hung in the air, thick and ugly. Miller didn't respond. He just watched as Kincaid's thumb moved with practiced ease to the console. The night, which had been quiet and damp, was about to be torn apart. Marcus Thorne saw the flashing red and blue lights bloom in his rearview mirror. He felt a pang of annoyance, not fear. He checked his speedometer 35 in a 35 zone. His seatbelt was on. His inspection was current. He sighed, signaling his intention, and pulling over smoothly to the curb, parking directly under a street light. He knew the drill. Keep your hands visible. Be polite. Be compliant. It was a different kind of drill than the one he practiced for his job, but in some ways it was more important for his survival. He rolled down the driver's side window as the officer approached. The rain had lightened to a fine mist, and the man who appeared at his window was large, his face etched with a permanent scowl that seemed to deepen under the flickering emergency lights. License and registration, the officer whose name tag read, Kincaid, barked. There was no good evening, no do you know why I pulled you over, just a demand. Of course, Officer Marcus, said his voice, even and calm. He reached slowly, deliberately toward his glove compartment. May I ask why I was stopped? I'll ask the questions, Kincaid snapped. Just get me the documents. From the passenger side, Miller approached his flashlight beam, dancing across the interior of the car, over the empty passenger seat. The briefcase on the back seat, the well-worn upholstery. He felt a prickle of unease. The driver seemed calm. His car was clean if old. There was nothing here. Marcus handed over his license and registration. Kincaid snatched them, his eyes barely glancing at the name before focusing on the photo. He held a small, powerful flashlight, shining it directly into Marcus's eyes, forcing him to squint. Marcus Thorne, Kincaid said, drawing the name out with theatrical suspicion. What are you doing in this neighborhood, Marcus? I'm driving home. Officer, home. Kincaid laughed, a humorless, ugly sound. Nobody lives around here driving a car like this. This is Oak Ridge, not the inner city. So try again. Where are you really going? The condescension was a physical thing pressing in on Marcus. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to remain placid. His heart rate was climbing, a thrum of adrenaline he hadn't felt since he'd stood before a federal judge to deliver his first major closing argument. This felt strangely similar. The stakes were just as high. Officer Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly, acquiring a new layer of precision. With all due respect, I am a resident of this state, and I am driving on a public road. I have provided my license and registration, both of which are valid. I have broken no laws. Unless you can provide a reason for this stop, A reason beyond your assessment of my vehicle, then this is an unlawful detention. Kincaid's face darkened. The shift from polite victim to articulate citizen had flipped a switch in him. He saw it not as an assertion of rights, but as a challenge to his authority. Unlawful detention. Kincaid leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You want to talk about unlawful? I'm thinking about what might be unlawfully in this car. Maybe some narcotics. Maybe a weapon. People who have nothing to hide don't start quoting the law at police officers. He turned to his partner. Miller, you seeing how nervous he is? Hands are shaking. Marcus's hands were perfectly still on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. Miller saw it. He knew Frank was inventing a pretext. Frank, maybe we should just run the license. Miller started, his voice hesitant. Quiet, Miller. Kincaid hissed, not taking his eyes off Marcus. He turned back. I'm getting a real bad vibe from you, Marcus. A real bad vibe. I think it's time you stepped out of the car. The world seemed to slow down. The rain, the jazz still murmuring from the speakers, the pulsing lights. Marcus knew this was the critical moment, the point where things could swirl irrevocably. He had two choices: comply with a baseless and illegal order, or stand his ground and risk escalation. In his mind, he saw the faces of his daughters. He saw the face of his wife waiting for him. He made his choice. Officer Kincaid. He said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, as cold and hard as steel. I am not stepping out of my vehicle. Kincaid's face contorted into a mask of theatrical disbelief. What did you just say to me? I believe my statement was clear, Marcus replied, his gaze unwavering. He kept his hands locked on the steering wheel, a conscious effort to display non-aggression while verbally refusing. You have no probable cause to order me out of this car. You have no reason to detain me further. You are now operating outside the bounds of the law. For Kincaid, this was pouring gasoline on a fire. This wasn't just a suspect anymore. This was a challenge to his entire worldview. In his 25 years, he had learned that hesitation was weakness and authority was a blunt instrument. You asserted it, you hammered with it, and you never, ever let someone question it. That's it, Kincaid snarled. He reached for his door handle. I've had enough of your mouth. Miller, standing on the passenger side, felt a surge of panic. This was escalating far too quickly. Frank, hold on, he said, his voice tight. Let's just write a warning for a cracked taillight lens or something and let him go. This isn't worth the paperwork. It's not about the paperwork, kid. It's about respect. Kincaid yelled, his voice echoing in the wet street. He yanked his car door open and stepped out. You don't let them talk to you like that. Ever. Or you lose the street. He stomped back to Marcus's window, his hand now resting on the butt of his service weapon. His presence filled the window frame, a wall of angry polyester and fury. I'm going to give you one last chance. Step out of the car now. Marcus's mind was racing, calculating, assessing. This officer was dangerously unstable. Any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. Every word had to be perfect. Officer, I am informing you for the record that this entire interaction is being recorded. Marcus gestured subtly with his chin towards his phone, which was nestled in a cradle on the dashboard, its screen dark. It wasn't actually recording, but it was a calculated bluff. Every word you say, every action you take is being documented. This sent Kincaid into a full-blown rage. The idea of being scrutinized, of having his authority undermined by a recording, was the ultimate insult. I don't care if the damn president is recording. He bellowed, his face inches from Marcus's. He reached in through the open window and unlocked the door. In a swift, violent motion, he pulled the door open. Get out! He grabbed Marcus's left arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of his coat and the muscle beneath. The sudden, aggressive physical contact sent a jolt through Marcus. Years of training of learning to de-escalate, to use reason and logic, were being met with brute, unreasonable force. Marcus did not resist violently, but he also did not comply. He allowed his body to remain a dead weight, forcing Kincaid to use his full strength to haul him out of the vehicle. He stumbled onto the wet asphalt, the cold seeping through his slacks. "Turn around!" "Hands on the car!" Kincaid shouted, shoving him hard against the side of the old sedan. The metal groaned under the impact. Marcus's head connected lightly with the roof pillar, and he saw stars for a brief second. Miller had run around the back of the car, his eyes wide with alarm. "Frank Jesus, easy. Stay out of it." "Miller, start searching the car." Now Kincaid ordered. He kicked Marcus's feet apart, forcing him into a wide, unstable stance. He began a rough, invasive pat-down, his hands slapping and grabbing with unnecessary force. He wasn't searching for a weapon. He was punishing him for his defiance. Inside Marcus, a cold, professional calm began to settle over the initial shock and anger. He was no longer just a man being harassed. He was an observer, a witness. He was gathering data. He noted the time on his watch. 11:14 p.m. It had been approximately 6 minutes since the stop began. He noted Miller's hesitation, his obvious discomfort. He noted the precise language Kincaid was using, the physical nature of the assault. He was building a case in his head. "What's in the briefcase on the back seat?" Kincaid growled in his ear, yanking his arms painfully up his back. "Legal documents," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "Legal documents," Kincaid mocked. "I bet. Miller, get that briefcase." Miller hesitated at the car door. "Frank, we need a warrant for that. It's a locked container. We don't have probable cause. The hell we don't." Kincaid shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "My probable cause is his mouth, his attitude, and the fact that he's in a place he doesn't belong. I smell marijuana. Okay. There's your probable cause. Now open the damn thing." It was a lie, a blatant fabrication, and they both knew it. There was no smell of marijuana. There was only the smell of rain and Kincaid's cheap cologne. But the words had been spoken. It would be Kincaid's word against Marcus's, a veteran cop against a man in an old car. Kincaid was confident he knew how that would play out. Reluctantly, Miller reached into the back seat and pulled out the worn leather briefcase. It had 2 brass clasps. "It's locked, Frank." "Then break it," Kincaid commanded, without a second thought. Miller looked from the briefcase to Marcus's face, which was pressed against the car. He saw not fear, but an unnerving, icy calm. It was the look of a man who knew something they didn't. The knot in Miller's stomach was now a cold, heavy stone. He fumbled with his multi-tool, inserting the flathead screwdriver bit into the clasp and prying. The old brass lock snapped with a sharp crack. Kincaid grunted with satisfaction. "See, easy. Now what's inside our big-shot lawyer's legal documents?" Miller opened the briefcase. On top was a thick binder labeled Civil Rights Division Case Studies in Police Misconduct, Eastern District. Underneath it were several folders neatly organized. But it was the item tucked into the lid's organizer that caught Miller's breath. It was a wallet, a black government-issue credential holder. Miller's hand trembled as he reached for it. He flipped it open. The photograph showed Marcus Thorne, but he was wearing a suit and tie, looking serious and professional. Next to the photo was a gold seal embossed and official, and above it, the words that made Miller's blood run cold. United States Department of Justice. Underneath the name, Marcus Thorne was his title. Deputy Chief Civil Rights Division. Miller felt the world drop out from under him. He stumbled back a step, the open credentials held in his hand like a venomous snake. His face had gone completely pale. "Frank," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Kincaid was still focused on his victim, frisking Marcus for a second time, finding nothing but keys and a phone. "What is it?" "Find the stash." "Find the gun," Frank Miller said again, this time louder, his voice cracking with sheer terror. You need to see this. Right now." There was a quality in Miller's tone that finally cut through Kincaid's rage. Annoyed, he let go of Marcus and stomped over to his partner. "What the hell is so important, you?" He stopped. He stared at the credentials in Miller's shaking hand. He looked at the gold seal. He read the title. He read it again. And a third time. The words refused to make sense. Deputy Chief, Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the entire power grid of Frank Kincaid's universe went dark. The smugness, the anger, the absolute certainty. It all evaporated in a single heart-stopping moment, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread, unlike anything he had ever known. He looked from the ID to the man standing calmly by the car, who was now slowly straightening his coat. The man he had just cursed, manhandled, and illegally searched. The man who had tried to warn him. The clock on the patrol car's dashboard ticked over. 9 minutes had passed since the stop began. Kincaid's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His blustering, domineering persona crumbled into dust. He looked at Marcus Thorne, and for the first time he saw him not as a stereotype, but as the architect of his doom. Slowly, shakily, Frank Kincaid began to lower himself to his knees on the wet, dirty asphalt. "Oh, God," he whimpered, the sound pathetic and weak. "Oh, my God." "Sir." "Please." Officer David Miller, already pale as a ghost, simply stood frozen, his mind screaming a single repeating thought. What have we done? The begging had begun. The rain began to fall harder, as if the sky itself were weeping for the colossal error in judgment that had just occurred on Hemlock Lane. The flashing red and blue lights continued their silent, frantic dance, illuminating a scene that had inverted itself in a matter of seconds. One moment, Frank Kincaid was the embodiment of unchecked power. The next he was a kneeling, broken man, his face a mess of terror and disbelief. Sir Kincaid stammered, his voice thick with a desperation that was utterly alien to him. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding." Marcus Thorne looked down at him, his expression unreadable. The icy calm remained, but now it was tinged with a profound weariness. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry anymore. He was simply observing the final pathetic act of a tragedy. A misunderstanding. Marcus's voice was quiet, but it cut through the sound of the rain with surgical precision. "Officer Kincaid, you have been crystal clear from the moment you initiated this stop. There has been no misunderstanding on my part." He turned his head slightly to look at the other officer. "Officer Miller." Pick up my briefcase. Close it. Place it back on the rear seat of my vehicle. Miller flinched as if he'd been struck. He moved with a jerky, panicked haste, fumbling with the broken clasps of the briefcase, placing it gently back inside the car, as if it were a holy relic. He couldn't bring himself to look at Marcus. He could only stare at the ground, his world tilting on its axis. Marcus then looked back at Kincaid, who was still on his knees. "Get up, officer. You're making a spectacle of yourself." Kincaid scrambled to his feet, wiping rain and grime from the knees of his trousers. His face was slick with rain and sweat. "Sir, I can explain. The car, the neighborhood, we've had break-ins. I was just being proactive. It was a mistake. A rookie mistake, sir, I swear." He was trying to blame his 25 years of ingrained prejudice on a moment of inexperience. It was a pathetic lie, and everyone there knew it. "You called your partner a rookie," Marcus stated flatly. "You, Officer Kincaid, are a 25-year veteran of the Oak Ridge Police Department. This was not a rookie mistake. This was a choice. A series of choices, in fact." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower still. "You chose to initiate a stop without cause. You chose to be belligerent and unprofessional. You chose to invent a pretext for ordering me out of my car. You chose to physically assault me. You chose to order my private property be illegally searched and destroyed. You have, in the span of less than 10 minutes, violated my 4th, 5th, and 14th Amendment rights. You have also likely violated half a dozen departmental policies and several federal statutes. So please do not insult my intelligence by calling it a misunderstanding." Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of Kincaid's career. The blustering cop was gone, replaced by a cowering man who could see his pension, his reputation, and his freedom dissolving before his very eyes. "Please, Kincaid," begged, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "We can make this right. We can just forget this happened. No report, no anything. I'll buy you a new briefcase, whatever you want. Just please don't file a report." Marcus almost laughed. It was a hollow, bitter sound. "Officer, you seem to be operating under the delusion that you are in a position to bargain. You are not." He pulled out his personal cell phone. It was not the one in the dashboard cradle. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a name. He put the phone to his ear. "Officer Kincaid. Officer Miller." Marcus said, his eyes locked on them. "You are to remain here. Do not get in your vehicle. Do not use your radio. Do not move. Is that understood?" Both men nodded numbly like prisoners on death row, hearing the final verdict. The phone connected. "Chief Wallace." "This is Marcus Thorne." There was a pause on the other end. The chief of the Oak Ridge Police Department, Robert Wallace, was likely at home, asleep. Being woken up by a senior official from the Department of Justice could only mean one thing: disaster. "Marcus, is everything all right?" Wallace's voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened instantly with alarm. "No, Robert. I'm afraid it's not." "Marcus," said the false familiarity in his tone, making Kincaid's stomach clench. "I'm on Hemlock Lane, just off of Route 7. I've just been unlawfully detained and assaulted by 2 of your officers. Badge number 734, a Frank Kincaid and his partner. Badge 912, a David Miller. I need you to send a supervisor to this location immediately, a sergeant or a lieutenant. And Robert." Marcus paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. Tell the supervisor to bring a body camera that is actively recording from the moment he steps out of his car. I want the rest of this interaction documented by your department." He could practically hear the color draining from Chief Wallace's face over the phone. My God, Marcus. I'm on my way myself. A supervisor will be there in 5 minutes. Are you injured?" "I'll live," Marcus replied coolly. "But your department's reputation might not. I'll see you at the station. We have a great deal to discuss." He hung up. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rain and the idling engine of his father's car. Kincaid looked like he was going to be physically ill. Miller was staring at his own boots, as if hoping the ground would swallow him whole. They were trapped. They had cornered what they thought was a mouse, only to discover it was a lion. And now the cage door had slammed shut behind them. 5 minutes later, exactly as promised, another patrol car pulled up. A burly, mustached sergeant named Peterson got out his face a grim mask of controlled panic. He had clearly been given a very direct, very frantic order by the chief. His body camera's red light was blinking a single, accusatory eye. "Mr. Thorne." Sergeant Peterson asked, his voice respectful and cautious. "That's me," Marcus said. "Chief Wallace sent me. He's en route to the station. He asked that I escort you there personally. And he instructed me to relieve Officers Kincaid and Miller of their duties for the remainder of their shift, and to escort them back to the station as well, separately." Peterson glanced at the two officers, his expression a mixture of fury and professional disappointment. "Kincaid, Miller, in my car, now. You'll give your statements to Internal Affairs." Kincaid didn't move. He just stared at Marcus with veiled, pleading eyes. It was a final, desperate appeal. Marcus simply met his gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. There would be no mercy. Not tonight. As Sergeant Peterson led the two disgraced officers to his car, Marcus Thorne finally allowed himself a moment. He leaned against the cool, wet metal of his own car, his sanctuary, and closed his eyes. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a deep, profound exhaustion. This wasn't a victory. It was a confirmation of a sickness he fought every day. Tonight, the sickness had just happened to target one of the few people in the country with the power to fight back immediately and decisively. He opened his eyes and looked at the pristine million-dollar homes lining the street. A community of excellence. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. His long drive home wasn't over yet. The hardest part, he knew, was just beginning. The Oak Ridge Police Department headquarters had never felt so cold. The usual late-night hum of activity officers, writing reports, dispatchers managing calls, the clank of the holding cell doors, was replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. Word had spread like a virus through the department's nervous system. Something terrible had happened on Hemlock Lane. Chief Robert Wallace, a man whose political savvy had earned him his position, was pacing his office like a caged animal. He had thrown on a suit over a wrinkled shirt, his hair hastily combed, his face pale. He had known Marcus Thorne for years, mostly through state-level law enforcement conferences and federal grant meetings. He knew Thorne was sharp, fair, and powerful. To have him be the victim of such a blatant act of profiling and abuse by his own men was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. When Marcus walked into his office escorted by Sergeant Peterson, Wallace rushed forward, his hand outstretched. "Marcus, my God, I am so sorry. There are no words." Marcus shook his hand briefly. "Save the apologies for the press conference, Robert. Right now, I need to give a formal statement to your Internal Affairs Division. Of course, Wallace said, running a hand through his thinning hair. Lieutenant Carmichael is waiting. We're treating this with the utmost seriousness. The officers have been placed on immediate administrative leave. Their weapons and badges have been secured. That's standard procedure, Marcus said, his tone flat. What I want to know is what happens next. This isn't about 2 officers, Robert. This is about a culture. What culture exists in your department that a 25-year veteran feels empowered to act like a stormtrooper during a routine traffic stop? The question hung in the air, an indictment that went far beyond Kincaid and Miller. Wallace had no answer. He just nodded grimly and led Marcus to the IA interview room. Meanwhile, in 2 separate sterile rooms, the reality of their situation was crashing down on Frank Kincaid and David Miller. Kincaid was in a full-blown panic, cycling between rage and terror. He sat across from a stone-faced IA lieutenant and the police union representative, a weaselly lawyer named Patrick Egan. "They can't do this," Kincaid blustered, his voice echoing in the small room. "It was a good stop." He was suspicious. "I had a gut feeling." Egan, the lawyer, held up a hand. "Frank, shut up. Just for the love of God. Stop talking. You don't have a gut feeling exception to the Constitution. The man you pulled over is essentially the federal government's top cop for cops. He writes the rule book you just set on fire. He provoked me. He had a mouth on him." Kincaid insisted, his desperation mounting. He asserted his rights. Frank Egan sighed, rubbing his temples. "And you responded by assaulting him. You ordered a warrantless search. You fabricated probable cause. I've seen the preliminary report from Sergeant Peterson. I've seen the photo of the broken briefcase. We are so far past provocation that we can't even see it in the rearview mirror." Egan leaned forward, his voice a low, serious whisper. "Our only play here is to paint this as a singular, terrible lapse in judgment. We apologize, we beg. We throw ourselves on the mercy of the chief and hope this ends with your termination and not a federal indictment." The words federal indictment sucked the air from Kincaid's lungs. Prison. He could go to prison for this. The thought was so terrifying it made him dizzy. All his years of being the one who put people in cages, and now he was on the other side. In the next room, David Miller was having a different kind of breakdown. It wasn't rage. It was a deep, soul-crushing shame. He recounted the events to his own IA investigator, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't try to hide anything. He explained Kincaid's reasoning, the doesn't-fit-the-neighborhood comment, the order to lie about smelling marijuana. His own hesitation. "Why didn't you intervene, Officer Miller?" The lieutenant asked, his voice neutral. Miller looked at his hands, which were trembling. I don't know. He's a senior officer. He's... Kincaid. You don't question him. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the moment he hit the lights. But I didn't. I didn't do anything. I just stood there. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with tears. I'm just as guilty as he is, aren't I? The lieutenant didn't answer. He just made another note on his legal pad. After giving his own meticulous 2-hour statement, Marcus Thorne finally left the Oak Ridge PD headquarters just before dawn. Chief Wallace walked him to his car, his old reliable sedan, which now seemed like a symbol of the whole sordid affair. I give you my personal assurance, Marcus, that Frank Kincaid will never wear a badge in this state again, Wallace promised. That's not enough, Robert Marcus said, turning to face him under the pale morning sky. This isn't about just firing Kincaid. This is about patterns and practices. I'm officially notifying you, as of this moment, that the Department of Justice is opening a formal investigation into the Oak Ridge Police Department for patterns of misconduct, racial bias, and civil rights violations. My team will be here on Monday." Wallace looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. A pattern or practice investigation. It was the nuclear option. It meant federal oversight, combing through years of records, arrest data citizen complaints. It meant consent decrees that would cost the town millions and hamstring the department for a decade. It was a career-ending, legacy-destroying event. "Marcus, please." Wallace pleaded. "We can fix this ourselves. Let me clean my own house." "You had your chance to clean your house," Marcus said, his voice hard as granite. "The rot has been allowed to fester for too long. Last night I experienced the symptoms personally. Now my office will provide the cure. Expect a formal letter by the end of the day." He got into his car without another word, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving a stunned and broken police chief standing in the parking lot as the sun rose on the worst day of his professional life. The initial karma of a ruined night and a lost job was just the beginning. The real grinding institutional karma was just getting started, and Marcus Thorne would be the one directing it. The wheels of federal justice turn slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. Within a week, the promised letter arrived, and with it a team of auditors, lawyers, and investigators from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They descended upon the Oak Ridge Police Department, not with sirens and guns, but with briefcases and subpoenas. They set up shop in a conference room, which the demoralized Oak Ridge cops quickly nicknamed The Hague. Marcus Thorne was not leading the field team that would have been a conflict of interest, but he was overseeing the entire operation from his office in D.C. His hand-picked successor, a sharp and relentless attorney named Amelia Vance, was in charge on the ground. The investigation was brutal and systematic. Years of traffic stop data arrest records, use of force reports, and citizen complaints were digitized and analyzed by algorithms designed to find bias. The results were damning. The data showed that Black and Hispanic drivers were stopped and searched at a rate nearly 4 times higher than white drivers, despite contraband being found at a significantly lower rate. Kincaid's name appeared on an astonishing number of racially charged citizen complaints, most of which had been dismissed internally with a cursory review. He wasn't an anomaly. He was just the most extreme example of a deeply ingrained culture. For Frank Kincaid, life became a living hell. He was suspended without pay, a pariah in the department he had once dominated. Cops who used to clap him on the back now avoided his calls. The union, while providing him with legal counsel, was clearly distancing itself, focusing its resources on the larger institutional battle. His name was all over the local news. Reporters camped outside his modest suburban home. His photograph, a grim-faced mugshot from his department ID, was everywhere. The strain shattered his home life. His wife, Sharon, had endured his temper and his cynicism for 30 years, always under the banner of him being a good provider and a protector of the community. But this was different. This was a public shaming. "They're calling you a racist on national television." "Frank," she screamed at him one evening, holding up her tablet. "Our neighbors are crossing the street to avoid me. My book club cancelled this week's meeting. This isn't just your job anymore. You've ruined our lives." "It was one mistake," he roared back, his face purple with rage and self-pity. "It wasn't one mistake," she retorted, her voice cracking with years of pent-up frustration. "It was the 1,000th time you decided you were the law. The 1,000th time you treated someone like dirt. Because you could. Only this time, you picked the one man on earth you shouldn't have. You're not a victim, Frank. You're a fool. A week later, while he was out on a bitter, aimless drive, he returned to find a note on the kitchen table and half the closets empty. Sharon had left him. The foundation of his life, the very things he thought he was protecting with his aggressive, angry policing, had crumbled to dust. All he had left was his rage and a looming federal indictment. David Miller's unraveling was quieter, but no less profound. He was racked with guilt, unable to sleep, replaying the traffic stop over and over in his mind. Every moment of his own cowardice felt like a fresh wound. He had wanted to be a hero, but when the moment of truth came, he had been a willing accomplice. His union lawyer, the same Patrick Egan representing Kincaid, gave him stark advice. You have a choice, kid. You can go down with the ship, tie your fate to Kincaid's, and you'll be fired and likely face misdemeanor charges. You'll never work in law enforcement again. Or you can cooperate. Cooperate, Miller asked, his voice hollow. With the Federals, Egan clarified. With Thorne's people. They're going to charge Kincaid. Not just for the stop, but for a pattern of civil rights violations. They're building a big case. Your testimony as his partner that night and on other stops would be invaluable. They'll want to know about the things he said when the cameras were off. They'll want to know about him telling you to lie. He wants me to be a rat. He wants you to save yourself, Egan corrected. They'll offer you a deal. Resign from the force, plead to a lesser charge, maybe obstruction with no jail time, and testify truthfully against Frank. It's a lifeline. The choice tormented him. Loyalty to a partner, even a flawed one, was beaten into recruits at the academy. But his loyalty was to a man who had led him into a catastrophe, who had ordered him to break the law, who had shown no remorse until he was caught. What was that loyalty worth? His decision came after a tense, ugly phone call with Kincaid. You better keep your mouth shut, you hear me? Miller Kincaid had slurred, clearly drunk. We say the same story. He was acting suspicious. We feared for our safety. The lawyer will handle the rest. He wasn't suspicious, Frank Miller said quietly. And we weren't in fear. You were angry because he didn't kiss your boots. There was a pause, then Kincaid's voice dropped into a venomous hiss. You little worm. After all I taught you, you turn on me, and I'll make sure your life is a living hell. You won't be able to get a job as a mall cop. And in that moment, Miller knew. His loyalty was dead. His career was already over. All he had left to salvage was his conscience. The next day, David Miller, accompanied by a new private attorney, walked into The Hague and asked to speak with Assistant Attorney General Amelia Vance. He was ready to tell them everything. The karma wasn't just about external punishment. It was about the internal corrosion of two men's souls. For Kincaid, it hardened him into a bitter, isolated shell. For Miller, it broke him open, forcing him to confront the man he had become and choose a different path, no matter the cost. The federal indictment against Frank Kincaid landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't just about the single night with Marcus Thorne. The DOJ, armed with Miller's testimony and the mountain of statistical data, charged Kincaid under Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. They built a case detailing a multi-year pattern of targeting minorities, conducting illegal searches, and filing false reports to justify his actions. Miller's sworn affidavit, which described Kincaid's frequent use of racial slurs and his explicit instructions to fabricate probable cause, was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the betrayal of his former partner, Kincaid's blustering defiance finally shattered. His union lawyer, seeing the unwinnable nature of the case, pushed him hard to take a deal. The alternative was a trial he would almost certainly lose, and a sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison. In a sterile federal courtroom, a humbled, visibly aged Frank Kincaid stood before a judge. His estranged wife was not there. No fellow officers came to support him. He was utterly alone. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of civil rights violations. As part of the plea, he surrendered his pension, agreed to never again seek employment in any form of law enforcement or security, and was sentenced to 36 months in a low-security federal correctional facility. The man who had built his identity on being a wolf, protecting the sheep from other wolves, was now just another inmate in the system he had served. The karma was complete, brutal, and absolute. For David Miller, the consequences were different, but no less life-altering. True to their word, the prosecutors allowed him to plead guilty to a single misdemeanor count of obstruction of justice. He received 2 years of probation and a permanent mark on his record that made any future in law enforcement impossible. He resigned from the Oak Ridge Police Department, a disgraced rookie whose career had lasted less than a year. He sold his small house, packed his belongings, and moved to a different state seeking anonymity. He found work as a night shift manager at a logistics warehouse, a quiet, solitary job where he could disappear. The guilt remained a constant companion, but by telling the truth, he had reclaimed a small piece of his soul. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a beginning. The Oak Ridge Police Department itself was placed under a federal consent decree for the next decade. The agreement mandated a complete overhaul of its policies, from traffic stops to use of force. It required implicit bias training, the implementation of a robust early warning system to flag problematic officers, and the appointment of an independent federal monitor to oversee all changes. Chief Robert Wallace, his reputation in tatters, announced his retirement a month after the decree was signed. The town of Oak Ridge, the community of excellence, was forced to pay millions in legal fees and implementation costs, a hefty price for decades of willful ignorance. Months later, Marcus Thorne was driving home once again. He was in a new car now, a safe, boring, late-model sedan that his wife had insisted upon. But he missed the purr of his father's old car. It was in the shop getting a new door lock and having its briefcase clasps repaired by a master craftsman. It was a piece of his history he refused to let go of. He drove down Hemlock Lane, the site of the incident. The street looked the same, perfectly manicured, quiet, and peaceful. But for him, it would forever be a reminder of the fragility of justice. He hadn't celebrated Kincaid's conviction. He felt no joy in the man's downfall, nor in Miller's ruined career. He only felt a profound sense of melancholy. His actions had brought a form of justice a reckoning. But he knew it was not a final victory. The culture that created Frank Kincaid still existed in thousands of other departments across the country. The fear that people who looked like him felt during a simple traffic stop was still real. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. As he pulled into his own driveway and saw the lights on in his house, he knew why he continued to fight. He wasn't just fighting for abstract legal principles written in a dusty book. He was fighting for a world where his daughters, when they grew up, would never have to calculate their chances of survival when they saw flashing lights in their rear-view mirror. He was fighting for a world where a man, any man, could simply drive his father's old car home in peace. And for that, the long, weary road was a journey he was willing to take day after day. That night on a quiet suburban street, a single act of prejudice set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It's a stark reminder that our choices, especially those made when we hold power over others, have consequences that can ripple outwards, reshaping lives and dismantling institutions. The story of Marcus Thorne and the officers who pulled him over isn't just about the shocking moment. A badge met a bigger badge. It's about the slow grinding and undeniable power of karma. It's proof that a system, however flawed, can sometimes be forced to look in the mirror and confront the ugliness it has ignored. What happened to Frank Kincaid wasn't just bad luck. It was a bill coming due, a reckoning that had been years in the making. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video, where we uncover more incredible true stories where karma delivers its final unblinking verdict.